Ugh! A groan echoed through the large chamber, and soon another voice followed. Boss, are you okay? Your eyes are bleeding. I'm fine. I just forgot how this feels. Perhaps we should stop and take a break. That doesn't look healthy. Maybe you're right. Roland nodded while ingesting a high-quality healing potion. His eyes twitched and his head throbbed as if he had a massive hangover. It did not take long for his body to recover, but the problem he was facing remained. It was much easier to copy divine and necrotic magic, but this soul energy was far more difficult. He straightened and looked away from Bernier, whom he had been studying. His assistant was performing soul smithing, and Roland had been trying to observe it with true runic sight, the upgraded version of his runic eye of truth skill. This was the same ability that had allowed him to master divine magic for healing and fighting undead. It was similar to the debugging skill that had started it all, but this time it was failing him. He could perceive something within the soul-smithing process, yet the moment he focused, a violent migraine struck, and his vision blurred before he could grasp anything substantial. The soul seemed to be connected to the system itself, perhaps even to the Ascension trial and the truth behind this strange world. It was no wonder it was so difficult to decipher. He might not be able to see through it until the skill evolved further. The ability to increase skill levels through runes would be game-changing, not only for him but for the entire world. If he mastered it, he might even allow people without battle classes to gain skills they normally could not. Still, such a feat would likely require more than soul-smithing alone. Available skills were dictated by class. Even if he could increase skill levels through soul-smithing emulation, it did not mean he could grant someone a skill without meeting its requirements. To achieve something like that, he would need to completely disassemble the human soul. His current theory was that the soul, or what he thought of as a databank, contained all the answers. In theory, the soul was a network of nodes, most of them locked and only accessible through specific achievements. Leveling was the most obvious method, but there were others, such as completing hidden tasks like slaying a certain number of monsters or crafting a set number of items. He himself had gained titles through crafting, or simply by raising his stats to certain thresholds. If he could unlock the soul, he might be able to force those nodes open and grant people stronger skills, or even new classes. But would it really be that simple? Roland had a theory, but he had no idea if it was even possible. Experimenting with something as abstract as the soul could lead to serious side effects or even death. He did not know whether all souls were the same or if there were safeguards that prevented nodes from being unlocked. It was entirely possible that the moment he tried, the soul would simply disintegrate. This was the kind of subject that demanded careful study, and he doubted he could truly approach it before reaching Tier 4. I would probably be branded a heretic if anyone found out I was trying to interfere with the world system. There were organizations in this world that, in a way, already tampered with the soul. They were the cults he had encountered. Through various forms of occult magic, they sought to twist and reshape the natural order, often at a terrible cost. The results were usually corruption. Twisted flesh, shattered bodies, and broken minds. Power was sometimes gained, but never in a form that could be called a true success. If he ever chose to pursue this kind of research, there was a real risk he would end up as some kind of eldritch horror. Boss. Bernier's voice pulled him from his thoughts. You were staring into space again. Roland exhaled and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I was thinking. He set the empty potion vial aside and pressed 2 fingers to his temple. The dull ache was already fading, and he felt fine. You always do that. Maybe, like the missus said, you should take a break. A break? I wish I could. For a moment, he wondered if that would ever be an option. He had set out on this journey to escape everything and gain his freedom, yet now he was once again working under constant pressure. Perhaps he could slow down and stop pushing himself so hard, but the thought of losing everything kept him awake at night. He had worked too hard to reach this point, and he was not about to give it up. That is what I expected to hear from you. How is the Lassie doing? Millie is doing fine, but she needs to train the new skills she gained before we can move on. Bernier nodded, a smile spreading across his face. Millie had been in Albrook for about a week now. Her level had risen quickly, and she was already close to the limit of 25. Her progress was impressive, but as always, her skill levels lagged behind. You should focus more on your own research. I know, boss, but it is hard without ever using something like basic rune mastery. I understand. Sebastian will help you catalog your research, and perhaps when you level up further, you will gain some kind of skill copying ability. I sure hope so, boss. Bernier seemed a bit disappointed that he could not help, but Roland knew he was trying. Ever since he had gained his new class, he had been working relentlessly to raise his levels and improve his skills. What Roland needed from Bernier was a way to enchant the new golem he planned to build. This creation would be piloted by a human, namely his brother. In a sense, it would be a second version of the power armor he had used during the trial. Robert already possessed several rune-related skills that reduced the mana required to use them. Through soul smithing, Roland hoped to enhance those abilities even further and perhaps grant him new ones he did not yet possess. This would make the new golem frame easier to manage, as the number of batteries it could carry was limited. He did have a few advantages over his competitors in this regard. The batteries could be concealed deeper within the structure and occupied less space than other options. In some cases, canisters filled with mana-infused liquid were used. In others, crystallized mana, or materials with highly condensed magical properties, even relics, served as power sources. Some dwarven craftsmen were aware of these limitations and relied on stalling tactics. Their golems were bulky and heavily armored, designed to withstand punishment until their opponents ran out of energy. The more their enemies moved and unleashed powerful attacks, the faster their reserves were depleted. These were not simple work golems that only needed to move. They were massive magical machines with precise operating systems that resembled the instincts of monsters. Roland's design would be different. It would not require a complex artificial thinking system, as a human pilot would control it directly. This would allow more energy to be devoted to movement and offense. His goal was to create something faster, stronger, and more efficient than anything the arena had seen. Faster, stronger, and more efficient. It is not going to be easy. Bernier scratched his beard. That sounds expensive. It is expensive. Roland replied while studying a large schematic on the blackboard. He had already outlined the outer shell and overall appearance. The frame was not as bulky as it could have been, since the machine needed to fit its user, his brother Robert. It had to match his fighting style, while also allowing for several improvements over the previous power armor. One of the biggest changes would be the section that housed the pilot. In the smaller version, Robert had worn something closer to a reinforced suit. It was not much larger than the person inside. This time, however, the design called for a 10-meter-tall, humanoid golem, something that in Roland's original world was quite popular in fiction, though typically achieved through science rather than magic. When he arrived in this world, he never expected his life to take this kind of turn. He used to craft suits of armor etched with runes that granted magical power, but now he was building machines that could think and move. So, boss, what's with that ball there? That's going to be the cockpit. Cockpit. Indeed. Do not ask why. I won't. Roland drew inspiration from a concept he had seen used for massive constructs in works of fiction. The people who operated them were called pilots, and they sat inside cockpits to control the towering machines. The one he was building, however, had no seat. Instead, it featured a rotating chamber designed to mirror the movements outside. It needed to respond to the golem's motion. If it leaned, he wanted Robert to feel it. Removing all tremors and compensating for every shift would make the experience feel stiff and unnatural. Robert needed to feel as though he was the golem itself, as that would help him orient himself more effectively. Roland planned to place the cockpit in the largest available space, the chest cavity. There would also be room not only for the main visual feed from the head but for 2 additional side displays. While mimicking human balance and vision was important, this was still a machine controlled by a person. Giving Robert awareness of his blind spots was essential, and with some training he would likely adapt quickly, given his experience as a seasoned warrior. Maybe after I finish this one, I could make a model for myself. Through this process, he would gather valuable data and likely refine the design to suit his own combat style. With his ability to manipulate runes and manage multiple streams of thought, he could probably control it in a more advanced way, even operating additional weapons and casting spells at the same time. His brother, on the other hand, was far more limited in his use of runes. Master Wayland, it is time. Just as he was about to continue working on his latest invention, Sebastian's disembodied voice echoed through the room. Is it time already? What is it, boss? I have to go greet someone. Being a knight can be quite troublesome. Bernier chuckled as Roland sighed in disappointment. He had already picked up his hammer and was preparing to imbue the cockpit prototype with runes, but now he had to stop. You are free to stay here or return to your own workshop. Boss. See you later. The room that housed the golem prototype had once been empty, but now it was filled with smithing equipment. It functioned as a complete workshop, designed to save Roland the trouble of constantly returning to the upper levels. He set his hammer down on one of the workbenches. Immediately, one of the assistant spider golems scuttled over, picked it up, and returned it to its proper place among the other tools. Roland, meanwhile, headed toward his armory to change into more fitting attire for a night. Will they want me to reveal my face? He asked himself as he placed the half-mask over his face and then set the helmet on top. An important guest was arriving in 30 minutes, and he was not sure who they might bring along. Better safe than sorry. Wearing his knightly armor, he headed to the elevator, his next stop Agni's stable. Agni, behave yourself and try acting like a noble creature for once. Worf. The wolf clearly did not appreciate Roland's words. Still, today's visitor had come for several reasons, and one of them was this sunlight wolf. Stop teasing him. He looks majestic, just look at those flames. Elydia was there as well and had spent the last half-hour brushing Agni's fur. Since he was the size of a horse, it was no easy task, but she seemed to enjoy it. Even though his body was wrapped in flames, he still had ordinary fur underneath, and it shed quite a bit. That was one of the reasons the Solarian priests were so eager to collect it. The fur could be used in elixirs and other divine concoctions, giving Roland another source of income, though not a very profitable one. It took a large amount of shed fur to produce even a single proper elixir. Woof! You should stop spoiling him so much. Now that Millie is around, he is starting to get a big head. His apprentice loved tamed animals, and if they were fluffy, she could not keep her hands off them. Today was Sunday, which meant she was not here. Instead, she was helping her parents at their new inn while working on her assignments. But look at him. How can you not spoil him? Elydia smiled as she scratched behind Agni's ear. The moment she did, his leg began thumping against the stable floor in quick, involuntary beats. The wolf let out a pleased whine, sounding more like a common dog than the dignified beast he was supposed to be. There, you see? Isn't he cute? Yeah, sure. Agni, let's go before your mistress spoils you even more. Woof. Elydia chuckled and wished him good luck. Roland headed through the main exit, where a carriage was waiting for him along with another prepared for Agni. It's the sacred beast, praise Solaria. Praise Solaria. The moment Agni appeared, the priests waiting outside began to shout. Roland disliked having to deal with them, but it was necessary. Agni seemed just as annoyed, but after a single look from Roland, he stepped into the large cart pulled by noble-looking steeds. It featured a large podium draped in golden cloth, more like an altar than a carriage, with sun sigils embroidered into every fold. Agni stepped onto it with exaggerated reluctance, making it clear he was cooperating under protest. The priests mistook the gesture for regal composure and nearly trembled in reverence. What great honor! Praise be to Solaria and her gifts! Praise Solaria! By this point, Roland had already climbed into his own carriage and drawn the small drapes closed. This was not something he wanted to be involved in, but advancing their agenda required them to welcome this new guest with open arms. For that, Agni was important, and so was the entire Church of Solaria. I was never a fan of churches, even in my previous life, just bear with it. He told himself this as the carriages finally began to move. His led the procession, with Agni's following behind. A large crowd gathered along the route. Some were regular city guards, while others were Solarian paladins escorting their sacred beast into the city. The journey took longer than necessary, as they moved at a measured pace. After about 20 minutes, they finally reached the gates. In the past, he would have been asked to show credentials, but this time, everyone bowed as the carriage passed, some even calling out words of praise. Their destination was the teleportation gate, the same one through which his apprentice had arrived. Have you secured the perimeter? Yes, High Knight Commander. Good. Let us wait for our guest of honor. Stay vigilant. Even though the runic eyes have detected nothing, assassins could still be nearby. The man he addressed was the current guard captain, and the knights with prosthetic limbs were also present. They spread out, securing the area around the teleportation gate. The arriving guest could not be harmed under any circumstances. In the distance, more figures approached. 2 knights on horseback led the way, followed by another carriage belonging to the city's lord, Arthur Valerian. As people caught sight of him, cheers rose, growing louder still when he stepped out. He certainly knows how to play to a crowd. His smile was well practiced, his mannerisms polished and regal. It was clear Arthur had devoted considerable time to perfecting his public image. The cheering around the gate swelled as he raised a hand in calm acknowledgement. His presence alone seemed to steady the crowd. How is it? He should be arriving soon. Good. Let's make a strong impression, my knight. Roland gave a small nod and a slight bow before turning his gaze to the gate. The runes carved into its surface were beginning to glow. Soon, the meeting would begin. Innkeeper, do you have something to eat, perhaps roasted chicken and some cold, delicious ale? An adventurer tapped on the counter of the inn. A lone woman stood behind it, wearing a welcoming smile. Of course, sir. Please take a seat, and it will be right out. Her voice was warm and practiced, the kind that put weary travelers at ease without effort. The adventurer gave a satisfied nod and turned, scanning the room before choosing a seat near the window. Sunlight filtered through the glass, casting a soft glow over polished wooden tables and a freshly swept floor. The inn was medium-sized and mostly full. A pair of merchants argued quietly over coin near the window, while two young adventurers compared bruises and boasted about a recent hunt. The scent of roasted meat and baked bread lingered in the air. More than anything, the owners of the establishment still looked on with awe at all they had been given. We have an order for ale and roasted chicken. Sure thing, landlady. Another man answered from behind what resembled a bar counter. He hurried off to inform the chef, a routine the new owner, Lisa, was still getting used to. Haha, everything is moving so fast. Is this really okay? Why wouldn't it be, Mama? You own this place now. Oh, I am not sure about that. Sir Wayland could always take it away. Why would my master ever do that? The deed has already been signed over to you and Papa, so stop worrying. I will not let anything happen. I will study properly and prove myself. The woman nodded with a smile as she spoke with her daughter, Millie. Some time had passed since they first stepped through the doors of this place, uncertain whether they truly belonged there. Even now, everything felt borrowed, almost like a dream. At any moment, she feared she might wake at the old Red Dragon Inn back in the dungeon, where the higher-level adventurers resided. While she held no resentment toward those people, it had quickly become clear that the people in Albrook were much gentler. The Tier 3 adventurers had often seen them as lesser, almost like servants who existed only to attend to them. Here, she felt normal. It helped that so many ordinary people with non-combat classes lived and worked alongside everyone else. Ah yes, should you not be studying right now? Master said I can take some time off, so do not worry about it. I still want to see more of Albrook. Lisa smiled at her daughter, whom she had scarcely seen this past week. If Millie was not at Master Wayland's workshop learning, she was running through the district making new friends and exploring every corner of the city, like a child discovering the world anew. You should not neglect your studies too much. Sir Wayland is strict, is he not? Millie puffed out her cheeks slightly, clearly displeased by the remark. He is, but he is also fair. Besides, I am learning a lot. You would not believe the things I've seen, Mama. Some runes glow like stars, some machines move on their own and even talk, and tiny spider golems that clean everything. Lisa let out a soft laugh, though a hint of unease still lingered in her eyes. That sounds nice, dear. And isn't it the same for you? We even have, what did Master call it, an ale dispenser. Oh, that thingamajig? It does make things a lot easier. We just attach a barrel to it, and it pours ale like magic while cooling it as well. Lisa finished, still sounding a little amazed each time she said it. Millie grinned and leaned against the counter as if she had something to do with the magical device. Magic is truly exciting. I wonder if I'll ever be able to make something like that. If you practice, I'm sure you will. For a moment, the two watched the magical ale dispenser as one of the new workers used it. Lisa was the innkeeper, but she had far less work to do than she had in the dungeon. For one, she no longer had to cook everything herself or serve as a waitress. The inn had a workforce that made everyone's job much easier, and there was still enough money left over for everyone to earn a living. Even though the prices were not low and magical devices helped reduce much of the labor, they could still make a good living. And the ale dispenser was not the only magical device that helped them. Instead of candles and torches, all the lighting came from some form of magic. It gave off a strange, soothing warmth and was gentler on the eyes than the harsher magical lights she had experienced in the past. Water was no problem either. There was something called plumbing here that allowed them to take baths and things called showers whenever they wished. Normally, people did not bathe often and relied on cleansing spells that always left the body feeling strange. If you're free, perhaps go see how your father is doing. I heard his new chief is giving him some trouble. Will do, Mama, but I also heard something is happening at the teleportation gate, so maybe I'll go there afterward. Millie smiled before dashing toward the exit. Lisa shook her head, thinking her daughter might be a little too enthusiastic, but she could not fault her for it. This new life they were building here was already far better than what they had endured in the third dungeon ring. The people were kinder, the pay was better, and when she stepped outside, she could look up and see the true sky instead of one made by the dungeon. I should probably help the cook. With a smile on her face, she moved toward the kitchen area. Her daughter, on the other hand, was outside, wandering through the streets and taking in the people and devices around her. Everyone seemed different, people of all races and professions filled the city, not just adventurers seeking to grow stronger. Carts rolled past, pulled by large beasts, some resembling horses, others massive tigers or even salamanders. The streets were loud with chatter, and along the way she spotted her father at work, being reprimanded by his new boss, a large woman with horns. Papa seems to be doing fine and has steady work in a proper smithy. She hid behind a corner, watching as her father got smacked by the horned blacksmith, a tier 3 class holder. While she was not as prominent as Hassim, she was still a respected craftsman in the city, and the wife of the soulsmith Bernier, someone her uncle Hassim seemed to respect to some extent. Focus. If you hammer it like that, you'll ruin the balance. I got it, I got it. He replied quickly, adjusting his grip and trying again. This time, the strike rang cleaner. The horned woman crossed her arms and watched closely, her sharp eyes missing nothing. He seems to be enjoying himself. Even though her father was being shouted at by a formidable blacksmith, he looked fully engaged. While Hassim gave him work, it was usually below her father's capabilities, since most of the smithy focused on rune enchanting. He had been more of an assistant than anything else, but here he seemed to have earned a position with real responsibility. I should probably leave him be. Millie chuckled and turned away, only to bump into someone. Ack! It felt like she had walked into a standing boulder. She lost her balance, but before she could fall, a hand caught her by the shoulder. You should watch where you're going, girlie. The man before her was enormous, and for some reason, his chest was exposed. He had muscles layered on muscles and was, admittedly, rather handsome. Cat got your tongue, or have I done it again? Even though he was somewhat good-looking, the moment he started speaking, she felt irritation rising at what he was implying. It's okay, it happens all the time. I'm used to it. If you want to look, be my guest. He began moving strangely, flexing his muscles and even making his pectorals jiggle, which made Millie want to run away. At the same time, she knew this person was strong. She had met many adventurers from the third ring, and while he might not have been as strong as them, he was certainly a tier 3 class holder. Hey, what are you doing, you idiot? Luckily, before the uncomfortable scene could continue, another person stepped out from behind him. It was a woman with pointy ears, not as long as a true elf's, but still longer than a human's. She grabbed the muscular man by the ear and twisted it without hesitation. I told you to stop doing that to strangers. Doing what? Hey, easy there, stop pulling my ear, dumb Elia. Who are you calling dumb Elia, layman? Why you? Millie had no idea what was going on, but the two started calling each other names and glaring. Then the half-elf woman moved closer and whispered to her. Don't worry, he is just an idiot, so pay him no mind. He comes over here to be a creep and stare at a married woman, like the loser he is. Best stay away from him or you'll catch his stupidity. Hey, I heard that. You're just mad you're flat as a board and no man will look at you. Armand shouted back, and the moment those words left his mouth, the half-elf woman jumped on him and started biting his shoulder. At first, Millie did not know what to make of the duo, but as they kept fighting, she burst out laughing. It came out louder than she expected, bright and unrestrained. For a moment, both of them froze and looked at her. See what you did now. The man grumbled. You made us look ridiculous. I did no such thing. This is all your fault. Eventually, the two calmed down, and to Millie's surprise, the sharp-eyed half-elf looked down at the large bracelet on her wrist. That's Isn't that something Wayland would make? It even has his symbol on it. Oh? I thought he had stopped making gear for others. They both stared at the bracelet, but Millie did not hide it. Instead, she lifted her arm and presented it like a treasure. Yes, this is a bracelet my master made for me. Isn't it great? The two looked at her in astonishment. Once they mentioned her master's name, she felt inclined to tell the truth. Her master had told her she did not need to hide the item, as it could help protect her from enemies. His name carried weight in Albrook, so in a way, she was using it to protect herself without lifting a finger. Your master? The half-elf woman repeated, narrowing her eyes. You mean Wayland the master runesmith? Yes. Millie straightened a little, clearly proud. The muscular man stopped rubbing his ear and blinked. Wait, brother-in-law, got himself an apprentice, and you're that apprentice? Why didn't he tell me anything? The reaction was not what she expected, as for some reason the large man referred to her master as his brother-in-law. Why would he need to tell you something like that? But... The woman glanced back at Millie and studied her face for a moment. He found himself an awfully cute apprentice. Why you know my master? At last, Millie asked the question. Of course, I know him. He is my sworn brother and the one and only man who has my full respect. The large man began flexing his muscles and boasting, much like Millie when she showed off her bracelet. Haha, I will have to ask Big Sis Lydia about it later, but for now, let us not forget why we are here, you big idiot. Oh, right. Just as they said it, a burst of cheers echoed from afar. The distant roar of the crowd rolled through the streets like a wave, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Millie turned toward the sound, her curiosity instantly reignited. Oh right, someone important was supposed to arrive today. That is right. An important noble is arriving, so watch yourself, Wayland's apprentice. By the way, you can call me Big Sister Lobelia, and this oaf here is Armand. There is nothing big about you. Armand said, only to receive a quick kick to the shin. Glad to meet you too. You can call me Millie. She nodded to the pair and started moving toward the cheering crowd. Lobelia only smiled and waved as they parted. The two seemed strange, but they did not strike her as bad people, and she could feel it. So many people, who could this noble be? Like any curious child, she pressed forward. She had been hiding away in a dungeon for the past 5 years, and she was eager to see more, to experience what this wide world had to offer. Yet moving became difficult as more and more city residents gathered around the teleportation gate she had come through. Millie, what are you doing here? Hey? Master? Where are you? As she tried to find a way through the crowd, the voice of her master, Wayland, rang out, though she could not see him anywhere. Your bracelet, Millie. Oh. To her surprise, the voice came through the magical bracelet she was wearing. Millie lifted her arm closer to her face, eyes widening as she stared at it. Master, how are you talking through this, and where are you? I'm at the teleportation gate, but what are you doing here? As he spoke, the runes began to glow faintly. Oh, I heard a noble would be coming here today, so I wanted to see them. After a short pause, her master answered. His tone was harsher than usual. I see. It would be best if you went home now. This noble is not someone to be taken lightly. Go back home and study the runic schematics further. But master, I already came all this way and... No. Millie blinked, her excitement faltering as she heard the seriousness in his voice. She wanted to protest, but she did not want to anger her new teacher. Nobles were dangerous, she knew that much, so perhaps her master was only worried she would get herself in trouble by staying too close, especially while he was serving another noble. I understand. For a moment, she puffed out her cheeks while looking toward the teleportation gate. She could see several armored men there, and supposedly the man who was her master, wearing a suit of armor she had never seen him in before. He was looking in her direction, and it made her shrink back in fright. Well, I wanted to see the other side of the city anyway, so I'll just go there. Good. Don't stay out too long or make your parents worry. I won't. She is quite the little explorer. That could get her in trouble, but it is also good to be inquisitive. Roland had seen Millie moving through the city through the monitoring devices and the bracelet he had given her. Once she arrived near the gate, he decided to keep her away, as he was unsure who would be coming through. Someone is coming through. Right on cue, the gate began to react, and people started whispering. Today's guest of honor was quite prestigious, to the point that Arthur was already here to receive them. As always, the gate burst with light as it activated, and soon a group of people began moving through it. Almost the same as before, but that woman is not here anymore. At the front appeared armored men belonging to the Church of Solaria. Some were full paladins, while others were still in training. They carried a banner bearing both the Valerian household and the church. There he is. Julius Valerian. It was Arthur's brother, the oldest of the group and the man most likely to become the next duke. He rode a white horse, clad in golden armor that gleamed even under the muted light of the gate's magic. His posture was straight, his chin lifted, his eyes calm in a way that suggested confidence. Behind him came attendants, clerics, and more knights, their formation tight and disciplined. The crowd quieted almost instantly, but to Roland's surprise, that was not all. At the rear, a carriage emerged through the gate, far more lavish than those the Valerian brothers usually used. Layers of magical protection shimmered around it, protections Roland could not immediately pierce to see who was inside. The moment the carriage came through the gate, all eyes were on it. To everyone's knowledge, the guest of honor was Julius Valerian, the first son of the duke and the man closest to becoming the next duke. He was someone who didn't quite seem real to the people living here, in what had once been a small town in the middle of nowhere. However, within a few years of Arthur's arrival, this place had been transformed into a large city, complete with magic, runes, and proper fighting forces. Proof of its growing importance was not only the working teleportation gate, but also the caliber of people passing through it. Still, the identity of the person inside the carriage remained a mystery. Roland stood there, trying to figure out who might be inside. He had a suspicion, but he could not be certain. Julius rode openly on horseback, while the other person remained within the carriage, as if being escorted by him. That alone suggested someone of even higher standing. Perhaps it was his lover or his wife, though it was more likely someone else entirely. Could it be that woman? But why would she come here? His thoughts settled on a single possibility. He doubted it was the Duke himself or any other noble. Neither Arthur nor Roland had received any prior notice, and both were caught off guard. There were not many people who could simply accompany Julius without announcement. "Brother Julius, how have you been? We have not seen each other since that incident. Have you grown more dignified?" Arthur finally stepped forward, while Roland remained just behind him as his right hand and knight. His gaze appeared fixed on the golden-haired man, but in truth, he was watching through the many golemic cameras hidden on the carriage and among the crowd. There were distinctive markings on the carriage, ones that did not belong solely to the Solarian Church. "Arthur, my brother, it has been too long." Julius came to a halt as one of his attendants took hold of his horse. Moving with effortless grace, he dismounted the white steed in a single smooth motion, his boots touching the stone plaza without a sound. Even without the height of the saddle, he carried himself as someone set above the rest of the world. "I see. So this is your city. You truly have been busy." His eyes moved across the gate, the guards, the runic windmills in the distance, and the gathered citizens, who stood in quiet anticipation. They were still and orderly, and to someone like Julius, their approval of their lord was unmistakable. "Albrook has grown, thanks to certain opportunities." Arthur smiled as he glanced toward the horizon, where new buildings were still rising, and more people continued to arrive. Julius gave a small nod, but his attention did not linger. Instead, his gaze shifted, almost imperceptibly, toward the carriage behind him. It had come to a stop, and several knights stood ready to open its door. The whispers in the crowd returned as the carriage came to a halt at the center. Everyone was clearly curious about who would step out, and soon Julius turned his attention toward it. "Ah, where are my manners? There is someone I would like to introduce to you, brother. You two did not truly get to meet last time." "Oh." Arthur's smile remained, though it thinned slightly at the edges. "Is that so?" The knights by the carriage moved in unison. One stepped forward and grasped the ornate handle, hesitating only for a fraction of a second before pulling the door open. A soft click echoed, and a figure emerged from within, drawing a surge of chatter from the surrounding crowd. As expected, Aurelia Valerian. Lady Aurelia stepped out of the carriage. Her golden hair shimmered as always, and the dress she wore seemed even more pristine than the one from the Valerian family gathering. A sun motif was embroidered across it. Behind her stood two servant girls with their faces covered by white veils, giving them the appearance of nuns. "Brother, let me introduce you to my mother, Lady Aurelia. Arthur seemed momentarily taken aback by her presence, but he quickly concealed his reaction and continued as though nothing were amiss. Lady Aurelia, it is an honor to welcome you to Albrook. He inclined his head just enough to show respect without diminishing himself. It was a careful balance, one he had clearly practiced. Lady Aurelia regarded him in silence for a moment. Her eyes were calm, yet they seemed to be searching for something in the crowd that was not there. So this is the city with the divine beast. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, yet it carried across the portal plaza with a strange authority. Roland had not been able to properly analyze anyone during the event in Isgard, as too many eyes had been on him, and doing so would have been considered rude. Now, however, he could sense a distinct power in her voice. From the energy she gave off, he could tell she wielded divine mana, likely as a priestess of the church in some capacity. Though he wanted to study her more closely, it was best not to push his luck. He could already tell there were powerful spellcasters among her entourage, along with formidable paladins. Through his information network, he also knew that Julius's mother had prior ties to the Solarian Church and was likely the one who had guided him onto this path in the first place. It was not surprising that someone like her would want to see Agni. Good thing he had instructed them to remain at the estate for now. Originally, the plan had been to greet Julius and then proceed to the mansion, showcasing the clean streets and the runic devices along the way. Lady Aurelia's presence had not been anticipated, but it did not present any real problem. Lady Aurelia wishes to witness the divine beast as well. Arthur was the only one here allowed to speak, so it fell to him to guide the conversation in the right direction. Roland, meanwhile, continued to observe everything around them. He saw no enemies and no signs of an ambush. If an attack were to come, it would happen either now or later in the night. For the moment, everything remained calm. I hope you do not mind, brother. Mother simply could not contain herself after hearing about the divine wolf of legend. There is no stronger faith than hers. Julius chuckled as he glanced at his mother, who was still looking around with quiet curiosity. The woman appeared composed and did not seem bothered by the fact that they were speaking about her. Arthur briefly looked toward Roland, who gave a small nod, confirming there were no immediate concerns. The divine beast is not here. He is at my estate. We have prepared a more suitable place for an audience. Arthur's reply came smoothly, as though nothing about the situation had caught him off guard. In truth, Roland could tell that Arthur was already reconsidering his plans. A visit from Julius alone was one thing. A visit from Lady Aurelia made it something else entirely. Arthur and Julius had endured a traumatic experience together and had rebuilt their bond through it. This was meant to be a simple visit where they could speak about the kingdom and their lives. With Aurelia present, however, strengthening that bond would not be so straightforward. I see. Then lead us there, brother. I doubt Mother will settle down until she sees this divine beast. Of course. Everything has been prepared for your visit. The tension that had quietly formed began to ease as formalities resumed. Servants moved into position, and knights adjusted their formation. Aurelia returned to her carriage, and soon they were on their way. The journey back to the estate was far less relaxed than originally intended. They could not visit the city's landmarks, and Arthur had no opportunity to point out his achievements to his brother due to his mother's wishes. Even so, the two managed to share a carriage and continue their conversation as they traveled. You have truly outdone yourself, brother. From what I have heard, this place could hardly be called a city before your arrival. You give me too much credit, brother Julius. I could not have accomplished any of this without my retainers. That only proves your talent and dedication. Choosing the right vassals has always been a difficult task for a lord. I have been fortunate. Arthur's gaze lingered on a particular knight riding beside the carriage as it passed through the main street. It was Roland, the man who had driven the city into a new era of prosperity, though he had no desire to stand at the forefront of it. Indeed, your knight is truly something. That he is, but your people are remarkable as well. I had hoped Lady Bernadette would join us today. Regrettably, Lady Bernadette was summoned by the Inquisition. Those cultists are an affront to everything we stand for. Julius' expression darkened for a brief moment. His polished smile faltered, then returned just as quickly. You know how it is. Duty rarely waits for convenience. Arthur inclined his head. Indeed. The Inquisition does not act without reason. The carriage continued forward, its wheels rolling steadily over the stone-paved streets. Outside, the people of Albrook watched in awe as the noble group passed. Some bowed, while others whispered among themselves, speculating about the unexpected guest. You mentioned cultists. Arthur continued, his tone drawing Roland's attention. Have they grown more active? Julius let out a quiet breath and leaned back slightly. He was not only the Duke's eldest son but also a high-ranking member of the Church of Solaria, as was his mother. They have become more organized. Less reckless than before. That makes them far more dangerous, not as easy to find or stop. No one knows what they are planning, but they have gone into hiding since the last incident. Riding alongside the carriage, Roland listened carefully through the small auditory device hidden within. His expression remained neutral beneath his helmet, but his mind was already at work. It was not unusual for cultists to halt their movements. They had likely abandoned their more obvious bases and gone into hiding, waiting for another opportunity. These old organizations were not easy to eradicate. They were like a hydra with many heads. Even if several were cut off at once, they would eventually grow back. I should be careful. They are probably watching even now. Roland knew he had drawn attention during the past incidents. He had likely become known within the Abyssal cult as a troublesome figure, though they had been unable to reach him due to the presence of the Paladin Order and the protection of the Valyrian name. That would change once he entered the main kingdom, a place where the cult could act more freely. Maybe I should not take Robert there, but there are few people I can trust with this task. He understood that bringing Robert into the Central Kingdom was risky. If his identity were exposed, it would cause serious problems. Yet there were no other capable pilots who could handle the large golem construct he intended to build. His brother knew the risks and was still willing to help, largely because of their sister. During the competition, Robert and Lucienne would finally be able to see each other again, something Roland did not want to deny them. There was also the headmistress. By now, he was certain she knew everything he had done. For the moment, he trusted her to keep his secret and even protect him and his brother, as long as he upheld his side of the agreement by winning the competition and helping the students secure higher standings. If he succeeded and earned a favorable result, many of his current troubles would begin to fade. The estate gates opened before the noble march, guards snapping to attention as the carriages rolled through. Unlike the city streets, the inner grounds were quieter and more controlled. Every servant knew their role, every knight their position. Nothing was left to chance. Mary stood at the front with a group of maids, ready to hand out refreshments and attend to the wishes of the arriving nobles. Before the estate, a large new fountain had been assembled, depicting the Valyrian stag at its center. The water flowing from the stag's antlers shimmered with faint runic light, catching the sun in a way that made it seem almost alive. It was not just decoration but a quiet statement. This place belonged to the Valyrians, and more importantly, it thrived with magic. Roland dismounted first, his movements practiced yet deliberate, careful not to appear sudden or threatening. The knights, paladins, and soldiers who had arrived with Julius remained on high alert. Their duty was to protect Julius and his mother. If Roland or any of his men behaved in a way that could be seen as disrespectful, problems would arise. Fortunately, the woman seemed somewhat distracted. I can feel the divinity. It is close. She stepped down from her carriage and immediately turned her gaze toward the area where Agni had been transported in his special carriage. In a sense, her behavior bordered on rudeness, but no one dared to point it out. Lady Aurelia did not wait for Arthur to formally guide her. The moment her feet touched the ground, she moved forward with urgency, her gaze fixed in a single direction, as if something unseen was pulling her toward it. Mother. Julius spoke softly, though a hint of restraint lingered in his voice. We are guests. She paused for a moment, tilting her head slightly, as if deciding whether his words deserved acknowledgement. In many ways, she held the highest authority present. She was the official wife of the current duke and came from a powerful family. Even though the city bore Arthur's name, it ultimately belonged to her husband, Alexander Valerian. It is fine, brother. I will guide you both. I am sure you also wish to see the sacred beast. Arthur stepped in before the situation could escalate and led them toward the back gardens, where Agni had been taken. Roland remained behind, rolling his eyes. To him, these people were making far too much of a fuss over his tamed beast. Agni was not some divine creature in his eyes, but a woven companion he deeply cherished. I hope he behaves. Roland glanced at the entourage Julius had brought with him. It was not just his mother. There were paladins, priests, and other high-ranking members of the church. They treated his wolf like an attraction, but there was little he could do about it. If this helped them grow closer to the Valyrians, then so be it. They already had an enemy in Theodore, and he was someone they could barely handle. I can feel it more clearly now. Aurelia whispered, her voice almost reverent, as the sunlight wolf finally came into view. Agni's fur blazed with fire as always, and he was in the middle of a yawn. A few priests stood nearby in prayer, but the moment Roland appeared, Agni's posture grew noticeably stiffer. Just act normal. Agni was intelligent, and they had discussed this beforehand, but Roland still was not sure how he would behave. He had instructed him to act like a holy creature with restraint and dignity, rather than the overgrown puppy he tended to become when left to himself. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Agni finished his yawn, stretched one massive foreleg forward, and then slowly lifted his head. The flames coiling around his body flickered in a steady rhythm, no longer wild and playful but controlled. His eyes, usually bright with lively energy, now held a calm, steady glow as they settled on the approaching group. Oh! Roland raised a brow beneath his helmet. That was better than expected. Lady Aurelia stopped the moment she saw him. Her eyes widened in something close to shock. She quickly covered her mouth as a golden light began to shimmer within her gaze. This is, how grand! It was obvious that she was a devoted follower of Solaria. To her, this creature was living proof of her god's power, something that affirmed her faith and deserved reverence and protection. Because of that, what she did next was not entirely out of character. How much? Lady Aurelia. She turned toward Arthur, her eyes no longer filled with devotion but with something closer to greed. How much? I will pay any price. This divine beast must be worshipped in the proper temple. She snapped her fingers, and her retainers stepped forward. Using spatial items, they began retrieving treasures and piling them to the side. Gold coins, rare minerals and metals, even monofilled crystals appeared. The growing heap was worth more than anything Roland had ever seen. I was afraid of this. He grimaced beneath his helmet as he watched. Refusing a noble woman like her could easily be taken as an insult, and he had no idea how she would react to being denied. I beg your pardon. Arthur's confused voice rang out as he stared at the golden-haired woman. The pile of treasure kept growing, glittering in the afternoon sun as though a dragon's hoard had been emptied onto his estate. Lady Aurelia did not answer at once. Instead, she stepped closer to Agni, her gaze distant, almost entranced. The priests behind her had already dropped to their knees, whispering prayers. Even the paladins seemed unsure whether they were meant to guard or to worship the sacred beast. I will not repeat myself a third time. She spoke softly, yet the weight of her words pressed down on everyone present. Name your price. Arthur's expression tightened. For a moment, the composure of a rising lord slipped. His eyes flicked toward Julius, searching for any sign that this was a jest or at least an exaggeration. Julius did not intervene. He simply watched, as if he too were tempted by the divine beast. Arthur then glanced at Roland, the true owner of Agni. The confusion over the Sunlight Wolf's ownership was becoming increasingly awkward. My lady. Arthur chose his words carefully. Agni is not a commodity to be traded. He is a companion to this house. When he finished speaking, Aurelia tilted her head slightly. Agni. It is the beast's name, given by its true owner, not by me. Arthur corrected himself quickly. He had no desire to argue on Roland's behalf. Naming sacred beasts, who would dare such a thing? Julius frowned as he heard the irritation creeping into his mother's voice. Roland was not sure how strictly she followed the teachings of the church, or how she interpreted them. As far as he knew, the faith had several branches. Some were rigid, while others accepted that divine creatures could form bonds with mortals instead of existing only as distant symbols of reverence. Roland exhaled slowly and stepped forward. The faint scrape of armored boots against stone drew attention. The paladins and knights at Julius's side tensed as they sensed the power surrounding the armored figure. Ah, this is Sir Wayland. He played a crucial role in our victory against those cultists. You remember, Mother? Julius finally spoke in support of Arthur. Aurelia gave a small nod. Yes. That man. Roland remained silent, waiting to be addressed. It was clear that Aurelia was not easily swayed. She seemed convinced that the holy beast belonged with the church, or perhaps with her. So you are the one. Her voice was quieter now, yet no less imposing. The one who named it. Roland lowered his head just enough to remain respectful, though he did not kneel. His posture stayed firm and grounded. Now that she was speaking to him directly, he could finally respond. Yes, My lady. There was a brief pause. The flames around Agni flickered. Aurelia's gaze moved between the two, the armored knight and the radiant wolf. Something in her expression tightened, as if the connection between them did not please her. A mortal naming a divine beast. Creating a bond that can't be broken lightly. Roland remained silent as she spoke. It was true that a bond between a master and a beast could not be broken easily. Either he would need to transfer the contract or die before it could end. There were also complications when the bond between a tamed beast and its master reached such a level. At that point, the bond became nearly permanent. Unless the creature accepted a new master, it would not transfer without the use of powerful spells and rituals. These were practices the church frowned upon when it involved their sacred beasts, who were granted the freedom to choose their own fate. Forcing Roland to relinquish what had already been established would go against those teachings, yet it seemed this woman was still willing to try. Aurelia took another step forward. The golden light in her eyes intensified, as if she were trying to cast a spell on Agni. Then release it. The words fell simply, almost casually, yet they carried the weight of a command rather than a request. A subtle shift moved through the gathered knights. Several of the paladins adjusted their footing, not out of hostility toward Roland, but out of uncertainty. They seemed to recognize her tone, and perhaps knew it had led to conflict before. Mother, please. Julius stepped forward and placed himself between Roland and Aurelia. He had clearly noticed the tension in the air and understood that whatever offering his mother had prepared would not be enough. He raised a hand, visibly unsettled by the situation. His composed expression began to crack as she grew more forceful. This is neither the time nor the place. Aurelia did not look away from Agni. The golden light in her eyes pulsed faintly. You feel it as well, do you not? Her voice remained calm, though now it carried a sharper intensity. This is no ordinary contracted beast. It is a manifestation of divine will. It belongs with us. It should remain within the main temple, within Solaria's gardens, where it can truly embrace its purpose. Roland's helmet concealed his face, but he was frowning. Above him, his floating golems watched the group, already scanning. Earlier, he had lacked a reason to use his identification skill. Now he had one. The people before him were not only showing animosity toward him, but also toward Arthur, someone he was sworn to protect. The others sensed the shift in mana, yet in a situation like this, none of them could object. Name: Aurelia Valerian L194. Classes: T3 Sun Bishop 44. T2 Sun Devout L50. T2 Sun Priest L50. T1 Cleric L25. T1 Acolyte L25. Even though her level did not exceed 200, she was still considered high level for someone who was the wife of a powerful duke. He was not sure what she did when she was away from home, but it seemed likely that she had once been an active healer. Reaching such a level would have required her to take part in battles, whether against monsters or other people, perhaps even cultists. Some of the people who arrived with her and Julius were above level 200, but they were nowhere near Lady Bernadette's level and lacked any notable prestige classes. Julius likely understood this and was concerned that Roland, who had demonstrated his strength during the light incident, might be difficult to handle. Lady Aurelia, why don't we head into the mansion and have some tea? I'm sure the cakes will be to your liking. Arthur stepped in, attempting to ease the tension before things escalated. Aurelia, however, did not move. Her gaze remained fixed on Agni, as if everything else had faded away. It only shifted when the sunlight wolf lifted his head in protest and turned away. Tea, the divine beast is rejecting me. Agni snorted and rose to his feet. He did not advance. Instead, Roland stepped back slightly and placed a hand on the wolf's fiery mane, which did not harm him. If I may. Roland turned toward the nobles, focusing on Arthur, who gave a small nod. Agni is not truly a tamed beast to me, nor a symbol of divinity. He is a companion who has been by my side for years. Our bond goes far beyond that of master and beast. I must apologize, but I cannot part with him, and I do not believe he would wish to leave either. The paladins and clerics could see that Roland remained unharmed, a clear sign that the wolf accepted him. At the same time, they could sense the divine mana growing hostile toward them. Angering a holy beast, even one bound by a contract, went against their teachings. Still, they could not defy the lady, who had yet to order them to stand down. Preposterous. After a brief pause, the woman spoke again, revealing more of her true nature. one that had not been visible during the noble gathering among the other Valyrian ladies. At that time, Aurelia had appeared calm, composed, and gentle. Now, faced with something tied to her faith, she showed that she could not let the matter go so easily. What would a simple knight not blessed by the sun know about her creations? She pointed at Roland as if he were some demon trying to seduce their sacred beast. Roland was not sure how to react. It was clear that this woman was more of a zealot than he had expected. The plan had been to let Agni frolic in the garden while he acted like a docile puppy, but things were getting out of hand. Growling. Without warning, Agni's mane burst into stronger flames, and his eyes locked onto the woman accusing Roland. The moment she noticed the hostility in his gaze, she recoiled, not in fear but in bewilderment. The holy creature is angry with me? But... enough! A loud shout cut through the tension. It did not come from Arthur or Roland, but from Julius. He placed his hand firmly on his mother's shoulder and pulled her back. Her authority was high, but the young lord was no slouch either. My son, what are you doing? I am ending this before you embarrass me and the church any further, mother. His expression shifted. What had been a mild annoyance hardened into clear anger. He turned to the two paladins standing behind him. My mother is tired. Escort her somewhere she can rest. The paladins hesitated for only a fraction of a second before bowing their heads. As you command. Lady Aurelia's eyes widened as disbelief flickered across her face while they guided her away from Agni. For a moment, it seemed she might resist. The light in her gaze did not fade. Yet when she met Julius's expression, whatever words she had meant to say died in her throat. Brother Arthur, could you have some of your people tend to my mother? I am sure she would enjoy some cake and tea. Of course, Brother Julius. Arthur did not hesitate. He glanced toward Mary, who immediately moved with a few other maids to handle the situation. Aurelia fell silent and seemed to regain her composure, but even as she left, her gaze lingered on Agni, who merely snorted and turned his head away. That woman was more trouble than Roland had anticipated, and her behavior felt unsettling. He knew people could be two-faced, but she seemed to become an entirely different person in Agni's presence. Someone like her was difficult to read. Would she act on those emotions and do something dangerous? After this encounter, his suspicion of her involvement in what had happened to Arthur's mother grew. She was a devout follower of the Solarian Church, while Illyria, Arthur's mother, had been tied to the opposing belief of the moon gods. It was possible that Aurelia might have harmed her over this conflict, even without any connection to the struggle for the duke's title. It could have been nothing more than a clash of faiths. Julius remained silent until his mother had been led far enough away that her presence no longer pressed against the gathering like a vice. Only then did he exhale, as if releasing something he had been holding in for quite some time. I owe you both an apology. His gaze shifted first to Arthur, then to Roland. The polished smile was gone, replaced by a faint quiver at the corners of his eyes. My mother's devotion can be overwhelming when it is awakened. Arthur gave a small nod, a slight smile forming on his face. It is no small matter to stand before something like Agni. Strong faith often invites strong reactions. Think nothing of it. Roland remained silent. His hand rested against Agni's mane, feeling the slow, steady heat beneath his palm. The wolf had calmed, though not completely. The flames still flickered, but with less intensity. His gaze then settled on Julius, who was also a devout believer in Solaria. Lord Julius. Agni here is quite docile, if you wish. He stepped back. Agni sat where he was and tilted his head in mild confusion. His gaze returned to Julius, as if weighing his worth, and then he let out a sharp bark. Woof! Oh! Julius was clearly entranced by the divine mana radiating from Agni. Roland already knew how pure the flames were. Such purity of mana was not easily replicated and seemed to enthrall sun worshippers like moths to the flame. May I? That depends on him. If your intent is good, he will allow you to touch him, and the flames will not burn you. Roland spoke calmly, his hand still resting against Agni's mane. He did not look at Julius as he spoke. His attention remained on the wolf, as though the decision had never been his to make. Julius seemed to understand. For a brief moment, he hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of something far rarer for someone of his standing, respect. Slowly, he removed one of his gloves and stepped forward. I mean no harm, O holy beast. His voice was calm and measured, as though any hint of force or dominance might lead to rejection. The flames along Agni's body flickered brighter, then settled again. His ears twitched slightly as Julius placed a tentative hand against his side. Roland watched from the side. Julius, a lord revered by many and the one closest to becoming the next duke, now looked almost like a child. The moment his hand touched the flaming mane and he realized he was unharmed, his eyes lit up. "Brother, the divine beast has accepted my touch." "That it has." Arthur nodded with a smile. The tension that had been building dissolved at last, bursting like a soap bubble. Now they could relax and move forward, perhaps even begin to build trust and discuss terms. This was more than a simple gathering between brothers. Arthur still hoped to secure something like a ceasefire between them, at least until Theodore was dealt with. Julius was not as aggressive as his brother, or at least he did not appear to be. He focused more on gaining power by helping people and earning favors, rather than through domination, as Theodore did. Arthur was still in the race, and he seemed willing to try as well, either to become the next duke or at least to ensure that Theodore did not claim the position. "It is, warm and so radiant, far more than any divine spell I have witnessed." It was clear that Julius was entranced by the purity of Agni's mana. The wolf, on the other hand, was simply sitting there with its tongue hanging out. The regal composure he had tried to maintain earlier was gone, and now it looked like an overgrown puppy after Aurelia had left. "Now we should be able to move forward, but that woman..." Julius was ecstatic as Agni allowed him to touch him. Roland, meanwhile, kept his eyes on Aurelia. The woman had been taken to one of the larger guest rooms and given something sweet to eat. However, she refused the tea and treats and instead sat there in silence. Her gaze was fixed on one of the windows, clearly in Agni's direction. Even now she wants Agni. Roland was unsure whether this would cause problems later. If the woman had ties to the assassins he had seen in the city, sending them to eliminate the master of the beast she desired would not be unthinkable. Still, the place was well defended, and paladins of Solaria who were friendly to him were present. They would not allow anything to happen to the secret beast or his master. "I will have to keep an eye on her." He glanced at the display inside his helmet and considered the situation. Things were starting to return to normal, though whether they would remain that way was uncertain. For a moment, he wondered if he should order Agni to play along with Aurelia's wishes. Allowing himself to be petted was not the end of the world, but Roland feared that if Agni showed her any sign of affection, she would only become more unreasonable. The pile of treasure offered to him meant little, as Agni's worth could not be measured in gold. He was someone Roland cherished deeply, and he would not allow anything to happen to him, not even if it meant opposing the Duke himself. "He is looking rather cheerful, almost childlike." Roland stood by and watched as Julius knelt beside Agni with absolutely no concern for how undignified it looked. The potential future duke of one of the kingdom's most powerful houses had abandoned every trace of noble restraint the moment the sunlight wolf allowed him closer. One hand carefully buried itself in the burning mane while the other scratched beneath Agni's jaw with unconcealed delight. Agni responded by leaning harder against him. It was clear he was thoroughly enjoying the attention. Not many people possessed enough strength to properly scratch a massive flaming wolf like this, but Julius certainly did. "Ha! So even divine beasts enjoy this?" Julius laughed quietly as Agni's tail swept across the stone floor with enough force to rattle the nearby furniture. The sound echoed through the garden courtyard, sending several birds fleeing from the surrounding trees in alarm. Woof! It was honestly difficult to process. A grown man who commanded knights, negotiated with high nobles, and wielded immense political influence in both the kingdom and the church was now acting like a child playing with a puppy for the very first time. "Ha ha!" Arthur laughed quietly beside Roland. "I didn't know my brother had this side to him. It's actually quite refreshing." Roland did not respond. He continued standing like a proper knight, though to him this behavior was not particularly unusual. He understood what growing up in a rigid noble household could do to a child. Even he had been forced to fight goblins before reaching the age of 10. He could only imagine the harsh training Julius must have endured. That impression only intensified when Roland glanced at the image of Aurelia displayed on his helmet screen. The woman appeared deeply devoted to her faith. Even now, she faced in Agni's direction with her hands clasped in prayer. Roland was not a particularly religious person, but he understood how demanding such devotion could be. True believers were expected to memorize prayers, legends, and ceremonies from an early age. He could easily imagine Aurelia drilling those teachings into her son throughout his childhood without ever allowing him to truly experience one. Julius had become the perfect heir, a man fully qualified to inherit a duchy, but perhaps he had sacrificed his childhood in the process. That lost part of himself now seemed to surface through this simple interaction with Agni. I probably wasn't the only one that. Arthur let the sentence trail off, but Roland understood the meaning well enough without hearing the rest. Both brothers had suffered through difficult upbringings, though from Arthur's perspective, Julius likely had the easier life. Arthur was still the bastard son of an elven outsider, a status that had shaped his entire childhood. It's not strange for a relationship to be built on shared trauma. Roland remained motionless beside Arthur while Julius continued scratching Agni beneath the jaw like a man who had forgotten the weight of his title. It was strangely humanizing to witness, but Roland knew better than to waste the opportunity. One person still stood apart from the moment, so in an effort to help the two brothers grow closer, he stepped forward and spoke quietly. "Lord Arthur, perhaps you should join your brother? You know Agni quite well yourself." Agni let out another pleased rumble and leaned his massive frame against Julius hard enough to nearly knock the noble off balance. At that moment, Arthur finally found the courage to step forward. "Careful there, brother Julius." Arthur reached out instinctively, placing a hand on Julius's shoulder before he could topple backward. For a brief moment, the two brothers froze at the contact. It was such a simple gesture, yet Roland immediately noticed the hesitation between them. Neither was accustomed to casual affection between siblings, which was hardly surprising given their circumstances. "My thanks. It's fine. Agni is a very active beast. He can be a handful." Julius let out a quiet laugh as he steadied himself. "I can see that." Agni barked proudly as if pleased by the compliment before shoving his head beneath Julius's hand again. The paladin noble nearly stumbled a second time, forcing Arthur to grab him more firmly by the arm. "Sir Wayland and the church spoil him quite a lot." Roland said nothing as he quietly moved away from the brothers' bonding session. Both of them were smiling now as they continued talking. Agni had initiated the interaction, but after a while, the two drifted away from him and began discussing other matters, including the current state of the kingdom and several future projects. "I've heard you've been planning something grand beneath the island. An underground railway, was it?" "Oh, you heard about that?" "Yes, though it depends on whether father agrees to it." While they spoke, Roland turned his attention back to the city around them. There did not appear to be any assassins lurking nearby, which left Aurelia as the only real concern during this visit. The woman had already proven herself somewhat unreasonable, though whether she was merely a devout follower of the church or something more remained unclear. Roland was still trying to determine who was responsible for the incident involving Arthur's mother and the loss of her eyesight. For now, he had little to go on besides the group of assassins discovered within the dungeon. The captured member had already been interrogated, and even with the aid of spells and potions, the information they extracted revealed little beyond the structure of the organization and a handful of minor details. What they really needed was a connection to the person giving the orders. To get that, they would likely need to capture someone higher up in the organization or raid one of the locations where the assassins were hiding. Something like that required time, research, and specialized forces. It was also the kind of task Mary and her group were responsible for, as they handled intelligence gathering beyond Albrook's borders. Roland's focus was on providing proper equipment and helping them grow stronger. By acquiring undead lesser dragons that could be controlled through his necrotic energy manipulation, it would be possible to raise their Tier 3 skills rather quickly. Before that part of the plan could begin, however, he first had to endure this day of brotherly bonding. "Sometimes, I hate this job." For someone who worked endless shifts and rarely slept, standing at attention in a peaceful garden was painfully dull. No attacks were emerging from the shadows, no cultists to defeat, only the tedious task of pretending to be a proper knight while serving as Arthur's personal bodyguard. The two brothers spent their time wandering through the garden, talking about both the past and the present. Julius brought up old hunting trips organized by the Duke, though from the way he described them, they sounded less like recreation and more like military exercises disguised as family outings. Of course, Arthur had never been invited, but judging by Julius' description, there was little reason to envy those trips. They had apparently been quiet affairs, with the Duke delivering long monologues while the younger participants were expected to listen rather than speak. Even so, Julius still seemed rather fond of his father. "Father is strong and just. I only hope I can live up to even a fraction of that image." Julius let the words linger as he held a cup of tea. The group had long since stopped playing with Agni, who was now lying beneath a tree, lazily drifting off to sleep. "Well, brother Julius, you can always leave the duchy to me if you ever grow tired of it." Arthur said it jokingly, and both brothers laughed. Mother would never stop complaining if I did that, but I'll think about it. Their relationship seemed to have improved quite a bit if they could joke about matters like that. Julius appeared unusually relaxed, though eventually they had to move on, as he had not arrived alone. Speaking of mother, I think she might be getting worried. Despite everything, she was still Julius' mother. Even if she had overreacted when she saw Agni, he clearly could not stay angry with her for long. Julius glanced toward the manor, the brightness in his expression fading slightly as responsibility settled back onto his shoulders. His posture straightened, and he carefully set his teacup down before rising to his feet. I should go see her soon. If I leave her alone for too long, she'll interpret it as disrespect. Arthur nodded lightly. She is your mother. It is natural to worry. Roland remained still, his attention split between the conversation and the garden perimeter. His helmet display continued to sweep for movement, but nothing unusual appeared. Even so, his earlier impression of Aurelia had not faded. If anything, it had only reinforced his belief that she was capable of treachery. Please don't blame my mother. Her devotion to the son has always been strong. I'm sure she'll come to understand in time. It's fine, brother. I think nothing of it. Roland wondered how far that devotion truly went. I wonder what she would do if she knew that Agni regularly visits dungeons and is treated like a tamed beast instead of being worshipped at an altar. He knew that if the church had its way, his wolf would never progress beyond his initial evolution. They would probably lock him away somewhere secure and keep him under constant guard. It was not a fate Roland wanted for his canine companion. Agni was meant to run free. I wonder how much of a fuss they'll make when he evolves again. After spending so much time in the dungeon, their levels had risen steadily. Roland had already done the calculations and knew that if they maintained their current pace, Agni would evolve within the next few months. His own level had also increased, though he was uncertain whether he would obtain his next class before the magic school competition began. There are still other things I wish to show you. People do not call this the City of Runes for nothing. Oh? Do they now? Arthur spoke as the two moved away from the garden and headed back into the mansion. Roland followed behind him, and before long, they arrived at the guest room where Aurelia had been escorted earlier. She had not caused much of a scene. At least outwardly, she carried herself like a proper noblewoman, though the displeasure in her eyes was impossible to miss. Julius, I wish to leave. But mother, we haven't even. The golden-haired man stopped himself as the woman turned a sharp gaze toward him. Arthur and Roland noticed it immediately. It was the look of a stern parent who had instilled obedience from an early age. Julius closed his mouth at once before turning back toward Arthur. My apologies, brother. I wished to stay longer, but it seems mother is feeling unwell. Would it be too much trouble to activate the gate again so we may return? The original plan had been for Julius to stay the night. They had even prepared fireworks, something still uncommon in this world, but it seemed the visit was now coming to an early end. Arthur's smile faded slightly after Julius spoke, and the atmosphere in the room shifted at once. Only moments earlier, the brothers had been laughing together over tea while Agni slept lazily beneath the garden tree. Of course. The gate can be prepared immediately. Arthur answered politely, though Roland could tell he was disappointed. The meeting had gone far better than expected until the very end. If Julius had stayed through the evening, there would have been more opportunities to strengthen the fragile bond between the brothers. Aurelia slowly rose from her seat with all the grace expected of a duchess. The earlier fanaticism had vanished completely. Her expression was calm, her posture elegant, and her movements controlled. If Roland had not witnessed her behavior outside with his own eyes, he might have doubted it had happened at all. My apologies for causing a disturbance earlier. She lowered her head slightly toward Arthur before looking at Roland, though she did not bow to him. The gesture clearly reflected the difference in status between them. I allowed my emotions to overcome my reason. Roland gave a respectful nod but said nothing. He did not trust her enough to engage further. After observing her over the last hour, he trusted her even less. The woman's composure felt practiced rather than genuine. Julius, however, seemed relieved by the apology. I told you mother would understand. Perhaps we can visit some other time, but for now, we should depart. Those cultists will not wait for us to defeat them. There is no offense taken, and I wish you luck in your endeavors. Aurelia's eyes shifted briefly toward the garden. Just as they were about to leave, she spoke again. Perhaps the divine beast could assist us in cleansing the northern catacombs of the undead gathered there. For a moment, the room fell silent. Roland immediately understood what she was trying to accomplish, and after her earlier outburst, he could not trust her not to attempt something underhanded. If he lent Agni to them, even if he accompanied the beast himself, he could easily find himself imprisoned for defying someone like a bishop while Agni was confiscated by the church. Worse still, they might attempt to sever the bond he shared with the wolf. Fortunately, Arthur knew better than to give her even a sliver of hope. "I'm afraid that will not be possible," Arthur answered before Aurelia could continue, but the woman was not quite finished. "The northern catacombs grow more dangerous with each passing month. A divine beast blessed by the sun itself would surely prove invaluable in purging such corruption." Arthur kept his tone polite, though irritation was beginning to show. "Agni is not a tool of the church, Lady Aurelia, nor is he a military asset to be borrowed whenever convenient." For a brief moment, Aurelia looked stunned. However, her expression quickly shifted, as though she had faced similar refusals before. "Is that so? Regrettable." Roland could already see where this was heading. Aurelia's voice remained calm and measured, and it was clear she was deciding whether to press the matter further. However, Julius was still present, and this time he stepped forward to stop her once again. "Mother, you were feeling unwell, right? Why don't we return and have the priests look after you?" "Very well, let us depart then. But if you find it in your heart, please reconsider allowing the divine beast to aid the faithful. Even a brief appearance within the catacombs would inspire countless people." Arthur's expression shifted slightly as he tried to maintain his smile. "I'll think about it. But the holy beasts rarely like to move at the desires of others." "I see." Finally, after a short exchange, the woman looked to the two attendants at her side and turned to leave. Julius wore a somewhat apologetic expression and, after inclining his head slightly, followed after his mother to their personal carriage and the men stationed outside. "Sir Wayland, why don't you help our guests return?" "Yes, my lord." Arthur had been there to greet the two nobles, but he was not their subordinate, so there was no reason for him to accompany them further. Roland, on the other hand, needed to be present if they wished to activate the gate again and to ensure nothing happened to the high-profile visitors. The return trip to the gate was rather silent. The citizens who had gathered earlier to witness the noble's arrival were certainly confused when they saw the carriage moving through the streets once more. Roland walked several steps behind the carriage while the escort knights maintained formation around it. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the streets of Albrook, and the noise of the city had dulled compared to earlier. Most people had already returned to their work after the excitement of seeing high nobles pass through the district. Soon, the gate was activated once again, and the two nobles departed in silence. The childish glint in Julius' eyes had vanished, and was replaced by a more stern demeanor. Before leaving, Roland noticed him glance toward Arthur's manor, as if reminiscing about what had happened within the garden. However, he quickly turned away and stepped through the gate, making way for his mother, who followed behind him. "Well, that was underwhelming, but we did seem to have made a slight dent." As the light of the gate faded, Roland reflected on the previous hours. Julius had not stayed long, but that did not mean he could not return later. Judging by how his mother had reacted, perhaps next time he would keep the meeting secret. A reason for another visit could easily be arranged, especially since Agni's next evolution would certainly be enticing. What will we do about those fireworks, though? After turning away, he looked toward the gathered citizens. An announcement had been planned for later in the day, telling everyone to look toward the noble estate where Julius was meant to receive a light show. Everything had already been prepared, but the guest of honor was gone. Still, that did not mean the day was over just yet. The streets of Albrook gradually settled after the departure of the high nobles, though traces of excitement still lingered throughout the districts. Citizens continued whispering among themselves while merchants and craftsmen discussed the unexpected visit with increasingly more exaggeration. "I wonder what all of that was about. Just nobles being nobles? I suppose so. I wonder how much that carriage cost. More than someone like us could earn in a lifetime." "That's true." Two peddlers with neighboring food stands talked about the events of the previous day. Life moved peacefully through the city, and smiles were often seen on people's faces, something uncommon in this age. "I suppose it's time to close up. The sun is almost down." One of the men spoke as he prepared to pack up for the evening, but before he could, he noticed someone running toward him. "Can I get some roasted meat? A full bag's worth." "Oh, of course. Even though the man was eager to go home, he still had some food left, and it was best to sell everything while it was fresh. Give me some of those onion rings, too. A full bag. As he packed the roasted meat, he noticed someone else rush over to the neighboring peddler, who also seemed eager to clear out his stock. However, it did not stop there. More people kept arriving, not just at their stands but throughout the entire food section of the merchant district. Soon, droves of people were scrambling for food that was easy to carry and quick to eat, which seemed strange. Hey, I was here first. Stop shoving. Can't you hurry up? They said it will start soon. I don't want to miss it. Ha, you should have had your kids save you a spot. That's cheating. The peddlers exchanged confused looks. They had been working there since morning and had little chance to leave their stands. Neither of them had any idea what was happening. The merchant district was usually loud during the day, but by nightfall, people normally drifted toward taverns and pubs while the peddlers returned home after a full day's work. Tonight was different. For some reason, everyone seemed to be in a hurry, as though they were afraid of missing something important. What exactly is starting soon? The peddler handing over the roasted meat frowned. The young man who had bought the food looked genuinely shocked by the question. You don't know? Know what? The fireworks. The second peddler blinked. Fireworks. The peddler frowned in confusion. The word sounded vaguely familiar, but he could not quite remember what it meant. You really stayed here all day, huh? I'm not sure myself, but they said it's something grand that we shouldn't miss. The young customer laughed and pointed toward the main district in the distance, where the town square had been established. They say Lord Arthur prepared some kind of giant magical light show. We can't miss it. A magical light show? The peddler repeated the question, but another customer shoved his way forward and asked for some meat instead, forcing the young man to step aside. Please, I'm next. Sure. The man nodded and started serving the customers, who suddenly seemed crazed for food. Still, he remained intrigued by the fireworks that had been mentioned, so he hurried through the growing line. Within 20 minutes, he had earned more money than he had during the entire day, and before long, he ran out of meat. He stared at the empty trays and roasting station in disbelief. Everything had been sold. For once, he would not need to throw anything away or store leftovers in the cold box to sell the next day. His neighboring peddler fared the same. The onion rings had vanished completely, along with most of the fried vegetables. I've never seen people buy food this quickly. Maybe there really is some festival. Maybe we should go see what it is. Before either man could continue, another wave of people rushed through the street toward the central district. Children ran ahead of their parents while groups of laborers, still covered in dust from work, hurried along with mugs of ale in hand. Some had even dragged chairs and blankets with them. Hurry up! They said it starts soon. If we don't hurry, we won't get good spots. The two peddlers exchanged a glance, and as if a switch had been flipped, they immediately began packing up their wares. In most cities, they would have needed to dismantle their stalls and haul everything away with them. Their stands had been built to be compact and easy to disassemble. However, they had already sold all their produce, and Albrook was safe enough that neither of them worried about leaving the stalls behind. With that in mind, the peddler made his way through the streets. Just as everyone had said, crowds were gathering around the city square. Adventurers, merchants, dwarven craftsmen, and even rough-looking men from the gambling district had all gathered there. This must be something really big. It was difficult to see what was happening through the sea of people, but as he scanned the area, he noticed something peculiar. Some people were climbing onto the rooftops of nearby taverns and surrounding buildings. He was not opposed to climbing himself, so he soon followed suit to get a better look at whatever was being prepared in the square. Hey, you were right, Senna. You can see everything from up here. Of course, Grycie. Who do you think I am? Once they were up top, he spotted a large woman who looked like a barbarian laughing while a smaller halfling stood beside her with her nose in the air. A few other adventurers were with them, including a man with a massive sword strapped to his back and a stocky dwarf who already seemed drunk. He lowered his gaze to the ground below and noticed strange metal rods jutting from the earth. They were covered in runes and connected by thick wiring that spread between them like spider webs. Guards, paladins of Solaria, and other adventurers filled the area as well. He spotted a muscular man flexing while an elven woman beside him rolled her eyes. They stood with a family of 3 beyond the barrier the city guards had set up. What is this really supposed to be? He sat down as people continued to swarm the square beneath him. The rooftops quickly became crowded as more citizens climbed up in search of a better view. Some carried crates and stools with them while tavern owners shouted from below, warning people not to damage their roofs. It seemed like the entire city had gathered there. He spotted a group of dwarves below, with what appeared to be their leader standing at the front. She was busy smacking them across the head as the drunken dwarves danced around her. A half-orc adventurer stood out as well, eating what looked like an entire roasted pig by himself. Even he seemed small compared to the massive man standing beside him, the leader of the Adventurers Guild, along with a lovely elven woman at his side. Is this really just some kind of light show, or are they planning to make an announcement? The merchant remained suspicious of what was happening. He knew nobles well, and they rarely did anything for free. If this was meant to be a spectacle, he expected them to sell tickets and charge admission, yet there was nothing of the sort anywhere in sight. If I'd known this was happening, I would have stocked up more. He was still a merchant at heart, and the lack of any prior announcement irritated him. If he had known, he probably could have sold 3 times as much as he already had. His disappointment over the lost profit vanished, however, when something finally began happening below. The people assembling the rods started moving away. Their leader appeared to be a short man with a strange metallic limb. Beside him stood a young girl whom he had previously seen with the family of 3 and a dwarven youth. The strange trio moved between the metal rods while workers carrying tools cleared away the last of the crates. The short man with the metallic arm shouted orders in a surprisingly gentle tone as he inspected the runic lines connected to each rod. With all the noise around him, he could barely make out what was being said, but soon even the workers cleared out, and it seemed the moment had finally arrived. Oh, something is happening. Yet. The people gathered on the rooftops began whispering excitedly as magical energy surged through the wires, and the runes along the metallic rods lit up. Soon, the tips started glowing, some white, others blue or red, cycling through every color imaginable before it finally happened. A strange sound echoed across the square. For a split second, the entire city seemed to freeze. Then the night sky exploded. A streak of white shot upward from one of the rods, soaring high above the rooftops before bursting into a massive sphere of radiant light. Countless sparks scattered outward like stars across the sky, lingering for several seconds before slowly fading. What? The crowd below stood stunned. Another launch followed immediately, and this time various shapes appeared overhead. Some resembled blooming flowers made of light, their petals expanding outward in perfect symmetry before dissolving into drifting embers. Others formed sharp geometric patterns that shifted into detailed figures. Mythical creatures appeared across the sky, dragons, fairies, and even Solaria in all her glory with the blazing sun symbol shining behind her. People shouted and clapped in disbelief as they watched the spectacle unfold. So these are fireworks. He was not entirely sure why they were called that, as there was no real fire involved, only light shaped through runic magic, but he did not care. His eyes widened as he took in the spectacle, and he was far from the only one. The people who had gathered there were completely enthralled by the display. Light continued to erupt into the night sky at steady intervals, each launch brighter than the last. The runic rods embedded throughout the plaza pulsed in sequence, creating a strange but harmonious melody. One after another, the patterns changed, evolving from simple bursts of color into intricate shapes that lingered impossibly long in the air. A dragon made of pure light curved across the sky before dissolving into shimmering dust. A cascade of golden sparks formed the outline of a castle before breaking apart into drifting embers. Then, for one brief moment that silenced even the loudest spectators, the image of the sun appeared overhead, radiating warmth across the square. I truly wish my brother could have seen this. He really outdid himself with this one. Within the Valyrian villa, Arthur stood outside watching the lights flicker across the night sky. He is a man full of surprises, Lord Arthur. Mary stood beside her lord, holding a tray in her hands while the exploding lights reflected in her eyes. So beautiful. As she spoke, Arthur nodded and turned toward her with a smile. His gaze lingered for a moment on the reflected lights shining in her eyes. Indeed, beautiful. He turned back to the show. The sky continued to bloom with light above the city, each explosion rippling across Albrook as though a second sun had taken residence in the heavens. Everyone in the city could see it, even those far from the main square. Adventurers traveling to and from the dungeon stopped in their tracks to watch. Merchants waiting by the entrance gate stepped out of their carriages for a better view, and even the animals near the forest lifted their heads toward the pulsing sky. This is quite something, but I'm not sure about the name. Wouldn't light works fit better? A woman asked the man sitting beside her. They were invented through alchemy, but I adapted the concept into runic magic. Of course you did. It was Elydia speaking to her husband, Roland. The two of them lay side by side on the roof of their home. A blanket had been spread across the tiles in haste, now slightly rumpled as they watched the sky together. Awoo! Haha, look at him. He's excited. Elydia laughed as she watched Agni howl at the sky. The next wave of lights rose higher than the others. It did not burst immediately. Instead, it climbed slowly, as if waiting for the previous shapes to fade. Then, at the very peak, when the night sky stretched dark and empty around it, the light exploded in a brilliant golden bloom that bathed the city beneath it. MHM. Roland nodded, though he never looked away from the display he had created. Elydia noticed something weighing on his mind, and a moment later, he felt her hand gently squeeze his. Is something wrong? He paused for a moment, leaning back against the blanket beneath them. It's nothing. I was just thinking that we haven't had time to relax in a while. Maybe we should thank Lady Aurelia for today, then. If she hadn't left, you'd still be tending to Lord Arthur and his brother. Elydia rested her head against Roland's chest, listening to the steady beat beneath it. Perhaps we should. His words faded as he looked back toward the sky. Another wave of lights rose overhead, forming new shapes. One resembled the Valyrian crest, while others twisted and danced together in perfect unison. Roland had seen fireworks before and had even set off some himself during New Year celebrations, but this was easily the grandest display he had ever witnessed. Creating lights with magic was not especially difficult, yet in a world like this, people rarely had time for things meant purely for enjoyment. Sometimes, though, simply looking up at the sky and allowing yourself to relax was exactly what a person needed. A brief moment to forget their worries and let their mind rest. You're thinking too much again. I know. It's hard not to with traits like mine. Even when Roland managed to relax one part of his mind, another was already racing ahead. It was difficult to silence the intrusive thoughts and truly rest. Too many times in the past, enemies had struck when he least expected it. Despite all the countermeasures he had prepared, he could never fully let his guard down, especially not with something so significant looming on the horizon. Maybe I should give you something else to focus on instead. Elydia chuckled softly before leaning in to nibble at Roland's exposed neck. The sudden touch caught him off guard, and his body twitched in response. I wonder what your enemies would do if they discovered this weak spot, Mr. Wayland. It did not take long for him to respond to her teasing. Whatever sounds the two of them made were drowned out by the spectacle outside and Agni's distant howls. A massive flower of silver and violet light blossomed across the night sky while Roland and Elydia lost themselves in each other's embrace. The lights continued to dance overhead as the city celebrated below, but like all things, the night eventually came to an end. Hours later, Roland pressed a kiss to his wife's forehead before slipping out of their bedchamber at dawn. That was quite the night, but it's time to get back to work. The brief respite had left him refreshed, but countless projects still awaited him. As he entered his workshop, he could see the aftermath of the previous night's festivities throughout the city. A few drunks still littered the streets while guards escorted others away, but overall, the celebration had been a success. Perhaps we should make fireworks a yearly tradition. The experiment had clearly paid off, and word of it would spread soon enough. He had never intended to market this little invention, yet he could already imagine nobles paying generously for extravagant displays to end their gatherings in style. Well then, back to work. Alone once more, he stepped into the larger chamber that housed a massive construct resembling a hamster wheel mounted atop enormous metallic legs. The giant golem was finally beginning to take shape, though much work still remained before it could be completed. Time continued to slip away, as it always did, and before long the chamber echoed with the steady clang of hammer against metal. His thoughts were filled with countless disastrous scenarios and all the things that could go wrong once the day of the event arrived. He could not relax. Too many people depended on him, and he could not afford to falter. The life he had once envisioned had changed along the way, yet he still struggled to remain on course. No matter what stood in his path, he refused to let anything stop him.